Well, a little while ago, I watched a video called the Ogres Are the Best Warhammer Race to Live As. And this is the humanity is the worst Warhammer race to live as. And honestly, I can't say that I disagree with this that much. I can't say that at all because, frankly, the concept of living as a person in the Imperium is a nightmare in and of itself because you could wind up being on one of the worst worlds, period. So, this is done by PancreasNoWork. This was requested by Excalibur324 from the Patreon request lists. He's the one that initially requested, I think he initially requested the first one, but this one is going to basically detail why life sucks as a human in any part of the Warhammer universe, both fantasy and 40k. In any case, let's get into it. This is going to be horrible.
Well, this video did well. Time to ride its coattails. Selling my values for money. Whoop whoop. Nah, for real though. Have you ever thought about how much it sucks to be a human in one of the Warhammer settings?
Yeah.
Seriously, being isekai'd into one of the Warhammer human empires, be it 40k or fantasy or Age of Sigmar, would be absolutely miserable. I'm
Yes.
talking constant pain and despair for 99.999999% of people. That's 8 nines. That's as many nines as my first gamer tag had. I was like, 10, leave me alone. Honestly though, sometimes people will say that humanity in these settings, particularly 40k, doesn't really have it that bad, and that for the average person, things are looking pretty alright. And I have to say, I really disagree for a number of reasons. It sucks to be a human being there. It sucks hard. Let me tell you why. First off, fantasy. I mean, it's pretty simple here. In Bretonnia, for starters, because I love shitting on Bretonnia, you're a
Right.
medieval serf as a default state of being. You wake up, you farm, you repair roads in your thatched hut with one room in it. 2, if you're an extremely wealthy peasant. You share this hut with your farm animals because there's no affording a barn for them. Again, you're a medieval serf and everything is owned by the lord of the land. You pay the
Right.
vast majority of the food you grow and any things you make to said lord in exchange for security and land because medieval life was a nationwide protection racket in fancy armor. And the lords treat you like absolute dog shit. You should
This
be
is-
honored if one of them walks all over you like a rug because that means the Lord paid attention to you long enough to do so. If you're really lucky, you might be cannon fodder in one of their wars. And if you're lucky enough to be a Bretonnian noble, it isn't much better because you're still at a medieval standard of living. Things like modern medicine and refrigeration or germ theory are at best crazy talk and at worst going to get someone killed for being a chaos cultist. Sure, you get to
This romanticizing of the medieval period by people just drives me absolutely crazy. The thought that life was somehow so grand is just so insane. Just so utterly insane. If even, like, the only thing that you had going for you if you were a noble is the fact that most times you didn't have to worry about you if you were going to starve to death, and you had it. Oh my god, the standard of living for nobles was just so massively over everyone else. It was ridiculous. But at the same token, if you were a peasant, well, you were screwed. Like just no. This is like, why romanticize that period of history? It was awful.
feast a lot as a noble, but that's still barely anything. Do you know how much flavor is in that bag of chips you're
None.
eating? A single Dorito chip would kill someone from medieval times. They'd go into shock. Why do you think things like salt and pepper were so goddamn valuable back then? Food was crap. I swear it's not just the ogre in me talking, the stuff was bland as hell. If you're
Yes.
a human in Bretonnia, you're gonna be in for a shit time if you aren't lucky enough to drink the Lady of the Lake's Gamer Girl bathwater. And even then you still have to deal with all the trash living conditions around you. You just get magically healed and live a little longer. If I shot you in the heart but it magically healed, you'd still be in pain even if
Right.
you don't die from it. And the Empire of Man isn't much better. The common folk aren't treated quite as poorly, but that's offset by the fact that the Industrial Revolution and its consequences are right around the corner for them. The good old massive wealth inequality, horrible factory conditions, and other things like horrid and squalid living conditions that made Karl Marx write that little book of his. So at best, the Empire of Man citizens can look forward to a communist revolution in their future, even disregarding that whole end times business. Same
Yep.
deal for Imperial nobles as Bretonnian nobles, only they don't even get the Lady of the Lake's piss jar for magical health and life extension. Did you know that in the Gotrek and Felix novels, Felix is treated by a doctor and is shocked when the doctor doesn't use leeches in the Four Humors School of Medicine. That's what these people have to look forward to. And almost welcome to Black Death compared to that. And if you live in either of those two countries, you sure as hell are gonna have to deal with a plague every now and then.
Yes.
Nippon sure exists, and that's all I can really say for it. Same for Araby, so who the fuck knows what's going on there. I'm assuming these countries have the same living situations as above, but I guess I can't say for certain. Telea is right next to Skaven Blight, so add all the fun of being a Renaissance-era peasant combined with the fact you live next to these things.
Yeah.
Doesn't he look like a friendly neighbor? The border
No.
princes are the same as Telea, only instead of Skaven, it's orcs. And Cathay lives by the ogres, who sometimes like to come out of the mountains and devour a town or 12 for lunch. Beyond that, I'm willing to bet that it's mostly the same as the Empire and or Bretonia, only with the added benefit that they're based on Chinese history. So I can only imagine at least one city in Cathay has had its occupants eaten by the military after rations ran out during a siege.
No. No.
God, I love Chinese history.
I don't. If you guys want to see nightmare scenarios, oh my god.
Oh, and of course humanity has to deal with the occasional raid by beastmen, or Vikings, or
Right.
rat people with machine guns, or
Yes.
elves looking to add to the pile of rape slaves in their dungeon, or elves who are theoretically on their side but the humans had the gall to ask why an army of elves suddenly showed up in their border, so of course the elves had to defend themselves from this wanton act of aggression, or attacks from their dwarven allies because 1,000 years ago one particular human's ancestor accidentally shorted a dwarf 2 silver pieces in a trade deal, so obviously the whole county had to go, or mushrooms. And for this video, unlike the ogres, I'll compare them to the other fantasy races so you can really appreciate how suck human lives are.
Yes.
First off, they're close neighbors, the dwarfs. I'm not screwing with you, dwarfs in fantasy have a damn near perfect immune system. It's brought up in, once more, Gotrek and Felix. The dwarfs were doing the thing where they complain about everything including humans being weak compared to them. Felix
Literally, the dwarves are the most bitter, self-righteous group in any literature that I've ever read at all. Like, their honor system is so abjectly ridiculous. It just beggars belief.
got some good comebacks in though, so that was neat. But anyway, yeah, as a dwarf, you're not getting sick, so for living conditions, that's pretty fucking insane. Hygiene just isn't an issue. But beyond that, their lives are pretty comfy. Or at least comfy in the sense that they care about. Dwarf
Right.
holds are pretty damn nice. Sure, they deal with invading orcs and ratmen, but that's everyone. If everything's going well, they're damn near impregnable in a siege. And the dwarfs, while also in the stage of the Industrial Revolution, are so obsessed with things working right and following OSHA protocols that their factories, for one, aren't run by child labor, and two, they don't run the risk of cutting off some poor bastard's fingers because the owners couldn't be bothered to turn a machine off while it's getting fixed. Sure, if you fuck up, you have to join the death cult, but even then, there's nothing stopping a dwarf from living his best life and drinking and singing across the world's taverns on his way to find something big and scary enough to kill him. They also live pretty damn long, so you'll have plenty of chances to enjoy life. The dwarfs are also a simple people. Love me mines, love me ale, love me grudgin', simple as. If you're a dwarf, it's easy to be content. If you're a human, you're probably miserable. How about the elves? Well, high elves for starters.
You can't go from the dwarves to the elves without me just like almost having an aneurysm about the fantasy Warhammer fantasy elves, because oh my god, the decision making process of the elves in fantasy just at times it makes the Eldar look halfway approachable, and then I remember other things that the Eldar have done that make me want to slam my head in a car door.
Starters just use magic to fix everything that goes wrong, so disease is again a non-issue.
Right.
Even Teclis with its magical bloodline curse just fixes it with some potions. Beyond that, it's similar to the dwarfs, with everything being comfy on Ulthuan in a more traditional sense rather than the dwarven sense of it works so we're happy with it.
Right.
They are depressed as a race because of how far they've fallen, but being sad because Grandpa was better than you is something I'll take over working at a weapons factory in Nuln, where the safety rules are to have fun and try not to fall in the molten metal they use to form the cannons.
Yeah.
As for the Dark Elves, well yeah, they don't have the best living conditions for a lot of them, but the Druki don't give a shit about comfort. One of the buildings in Total Warhammer 2 says as much. They just care about getting slaves and murdering things. Slaves, which of course are usually human, so there's another mark against mankind in these shithole worlds. And
If you play in Warhammer, if you play Total War Warhammer, you played as the Dark Elves, you legitimately became a horrible person the second that you loaded up that game. Because there was no way to play a good person. There was no way to play a straight campaign. You were gonna be a shitbird.
the Wood Elves,
What
I
about
have no
the Wood
fucking
Elves?
idea, man.
Who
They live in
cares?
Athel Loren, which is absolutely insane, but the forest likes them, so they get to have magical woodland fairy lives instead of being murdered by Ents. Except sometimes the Ents still murder them because they're angry at them for whatever reason. Also, they
knows?
sometimes hold hunts where they run down Bretonnian citizens for a laugh. It really sucks to be Bretonnian.
Yes.
Of course, the Wood Elves never really complain about it, and I'm pretty sure the average Wood Elf is also batshit insane, so they don't care about these downsides. Use some magic and your mundane problems are gone, and any other problems they don't see as problems. Yeah, of course the Dryad feast out of my entrails. That just happens in Athel Loren, you know? I'm still living it up. I made a whole video on why ogre lives are great, so if you want that explanation, here it is. No, I don't have any shame, thank you for asking. From what I gathered, Age of Sigmar is more or less the same for the average person, only with the added benefit of whatever you live in being miserable in its own unique way. Do you live in Akshi? I hope you don't mind 120-degree heat 24/7. I know there's one city in the realm of life that's industrializing so horribly that it chokes the surrounding area with smog 24/7, so there's that one too. Or you could live
Lovely.
in the realm of beasts where you have to contend with the mountain you live on actually being a giant angry turtle. God, these settings suck for the average person. The only race with a worse standard of living than humanity are the Skaven. I was going to try to justify that the Skaven in a way don't have it as bad as humanity, but even I couldn't bring myself to do that. I will say, however, that humans and rats have very different mindsets about living situations.
Yes, they do.
Specifically, the rats always have the grind set. Every Skaven from the lowliest slave to the Grey Seers think they're the best and they just have to work their way up to being in total control to guide the Skaven to victory. Most of them
that's-
are wrong, of course, but they still believe this. And they're
that's
so
not an
ambition-driven
exaggeration.
that their position in life is almost irrelevant to them beyond what it allows them to have access to and get away with. So no, the Skaven certainly aren't living better than humans, but it also definitely doesn't bother them as much as an equivalent living situation would a human.
Yeah, they legitimately don't care.
Rats stay winning. Now for 40k,
Oh,
and this
God.
is the one I wanted to talk about the most because a lot of people seem to think that humanity is living its best life here if they aren't actively in a war zone. It isn't. Humanity in 40k is miserable. It's slaving away in service to a corpse on a throne in miserable conditions where it will receive almost nothing in exchange for lifelong servitude. But in 40k, there's loads of different specific worlds to look at for exactly why it sucks to be a human.
Yep.
If you live on a pleasure world, I will grant you that life is probably good.
No,
Even
it's
as a
not.
servant, you're still on a pleasure world. Life isn't that bad when your job is being a
Your job is to make everyone else happy. And some of those nobles have really, really screwed up tastes.
butler in the Garden of Eden. Oh no, my weekends are spent relaxing at the beach and drinking martinis all day long. How do I do it? But pleasure worlds are rare. They are such a small fraction of planets in the Imperium of Man that they're
Thankfully.
barely worth mentioning. Truth be told, I only brought them up because I need to get the argument against my points out of the way first. If that makes me an asshole, then that's up to you to decide. For the suck, let's go to the civilized worlds. A lot of people say that they're equivalent of, a modern-day first-world country. And I will admit that in the Caiaphas Cain books, some of the times when Cain is wandering a planet looking for ways to avoid the war zone he's supposed to be a part of, these worlds don't look like the worst places to live. This viewpoint isn't wrong, but it also isn't telling the whole story. They're
Right.
roughly the equivalent of Earth as it is now, plus or minus a few hundred years of technology. So you could live in the world that's modern-day Germany or America. Or you could live in the equivalent of a colonial world where one part of the world controls the rest of it. The Imperium
Yep.
doesn't care if that's the case. You may be slaving away on a sugar plantation, but as long as the guard gets its tith, then it isn't going to do shit. Or
It just, like, the sheer fact that you can go to one planet and it's ruled by a bunch of tribal chieftains, and you go to the next planet and they literally have a planetary governor sitting there as sort of the emperor of the planet, and then you go to the next planet and it's a democratic republic. It really just depends. And the next planet over is a feudal kingdom. And the next planet besides that it's Krieg.
you could live on the planet of sweatshop factories that has just little levels of pollution to not count as a forge world. Technically counts as a civilized world, but tell that to the factory workers making ultramarine plushies for the system a few light years over for their
Right.
entire lives. But even the most wonderful civilized world, you aren't living the ideal 1950s suburban American community without all the society problems ending with the suffix phobia, or ism. You're living in the world of the man in the high castle, or given that it's Warhammer, Wolfenstein land is probably more accurate. Your government dictates how you think, how you work, and how you live in general. Sure, it can be more subtle on these planets, but your life is still completely at the whim of the Imperium. Your religious beliefs are
True.
decided for you. If you bring up that perhaps this religion everyone is following has a few flaws, then you are going to be blackbagged before you can finish the sentence. It is a
Black-
veneer of pleasant
You're not gonna be you're not gonna be blackbagged. You're gonna be blammed, and that's gonna be all there is to say about it.
tree hiding the fact that you were living in the most horrid dictatorship ever. Wonder why Bobby stopped showing up at the country club? Well, you shouldn't, because Bobby never existed, and if you bring him up again, you're going to the same place he did. Just because in a civilized world you aren't actively effectively having the Imperium's boot step on your throat doesn't mean it's a wonderful life. In fact,
Exactly.
it's still a shitty life. The Imperium is just doing its best to make sure you don't realize it. Just because you have a decently comfy bed to retire to at night doesn't mean you live a good life. Your
No.
human rights are still being viciously violated, and not knowing about that fact doesn't make it better. It's worth remembering that the Imperium is a nightmare. It's not a good place. It is repeatedly stated to be corrupt and incompetent and ruthless and nightmarish and several other negative adjectives. I mean,
Yes.
hell, Games Workshop has said as much directly on multiple occasions. 40k also has the added benefit over fantasy that your government can decide, oh, this planet needs to go, and
Yep.
burn you and your world to kingdom come. Mini rant
For
over.
little
What
reasons
about
sometimes.
agricultural worlds? Gotta be a nice planet-wide farm, right? That sounds relaxing. Well, the Imperium is such a mess of technological levels that, yeah, some are probably like that.
It really just depends on how much attention that planet has gotten. It really depends. Some are very idyllic. Others are just...
But then you're just back to being a Bretonian serf with the knowledge that sometimes big metal birds come from the sky to take your food. Otherwise, you live on a planet that's constantly dealing with fertilizer runoff and is being kept just ecologically clean enough to keep all the food production from dying out. These places suck. Hive worlds, good God, they're awful. They're not having you work
Yes.
22 hours a day, 7 days a week. That level of grimdark is too stupid for me to push as fact. But what is fact is that you live in an apartment most people would consider to be a closet at best. You have no privacy because your walls are shared with 10 other people, half of whom are actually part of your family. The building you live on is also 10,000 years old and hasn't been maintained in 5,000, so have fun with the occasional structural collapse taking a small country's worth of people down with it. Pollution
There is actually such a thing in 40k in the Hive cities known as a Hive quake. Let that sink in.
is a given, so have fun breathing an atmosphere of 20% carbon dioxide and God knows what else. Oh, and chances are you live so far beneath the quote-unquote surface of the Hive world that not only have you never seen the sun, but you may not have even heard of it. If you're
Right.
educated, you're educated exactly enough to know how much to work in the factory that has never heard of something like a guardrail, much less actual hazard equipment and training. Oh, and the farther you
Accurate.
go down in the Hive, the worse it gets somehow.
Accurate.
You've got mutants, chaos cults, gene sealer cults, fanatical cults of the Emperor, which you would think would be on your side until they murder you and your family for breathing in a way that they think is unholy, and waterfalls of factory waste that turn not only the lower levels of the Hive, but the areas surrounding it into places that are somehow worse than the rest of it. On a Hive world, your life is miserable.
Yep.
Just because you aren't working 24/7 in a factory making guns doesn't mean you're just hanging around chilling out. Just because you get a lunch break in hell doesn't mean you aren't in hell. Also,
Right.
this is more of a personal belief of mine, so feel free to accept or ignore this part at your leisure, but even though Hive worlds are a minority of planets in the Imperium, I genuinely think they make up at least 50% of the people in it. They have trillions of people on them, if not more. Some of the things I've read place that number in the quadrillions. That many people on one planet is going to cause nothing but squalor, unrest, and countless other problems at all times.
Right.
If I'm right about what percentage of humanity is located on Hive worlds, then that means being born a human in 40k means you'll most likely be placed in one of these shit pits. If I'm wrong, then these places are still absolute hellholes to live in. Let's run through the rest of the worlds real quick because I feel like I've made my point. If you live on a fair world, then you're just a caveman, so yeah, that sucks. If you think a death world is great to live on and you would totally survive there, then I have nothing else to say to you that would convince you otherwise, you
No.
silly little LARPer you. Forge worlds are like Hive worlds, only so polluted that if you aren't augmented to survive on them, or a tech priest who's already 80% machine anyways, you can't even breathe on the things. Fortress
True.
worlds are like Cadia, so your life is going to be nothing but constant military service or working to feed the military in horrid factory conditions, only this time you're probably going to be the target of some invading army or other every few weeks.
Now, one thing that always drives me nuts when people talk about the Imperial Guard, and especially when you consider Cadia is a part of that Imperial Guard, even though Cadia is the kind of like the gold standard, is the gold standard. These people were trained in military combat and military procedure, drill, everything like that, since they were old enough to walk on a fortress world. You really don't do much else on a fortress world besides train to fight and hold that world. And there's not many fortress worlds out there. But on Cadia, oh my God, there was no such thing as school. Your school was, a military tactics school if you were lucky enough to do that. Otherwise, your school was learning how to clean your lasgun 7 ways from Sunday, and then how to sit there and actually, operate any kind of machinery that you were lucky enough to be put in charge of.
Night worlds have all the fun of feudalism crossed with robots. Sure,
Right.
it probably looks cool, but I wouldn't want to live there. And
No.
while they may be rarely populated, if you're unfortunate enough to live on or even near a demon world, They're called demon worlds. Do you really need me to explain that one? All in all, being a human sucks in 40k even more than it does in fantasy. The one thing I can say for humanity is that if you're part of the elite, your life is probably great. Life extending treatments, luxurious living, power over the masses, the works. But that's such a small percentage of people that I don't even think I can say that they're the 1%. They're the 1% of the 1% because most of the top 1% is only considered such because they get a piece of bread that isn't moldy in their weekly rations.
Right.
Even living as a superhuman in 40k still sucks. Space Marines are constantly fighting horrid wars, and depending on which chapter you are, you may or may not have degenerative DNA inserted into you. Hope you have fun turning into...
Also, one of the first steps, well, sorry, not one of the first steps, one of the final steps is having your skin flayed off use of something called the black carrot paste can be installed. Have fun with that.
a rage monster who thinks everyone around him is named Horus, and since this just seems to escape the mind of most people, don't forget that intense indoctrination are explicitly part of Space Marine training. I know the word gets used so often in 40k that it loses all meaning, but please remember that indoctrination is a bad thing. Also, the benefits you do get from being a Space Marine are almost irrelevant because there's roughly one Space Marine per planet in the Imperium. Yeah, I know that some chapters have more than just 1,000 Marines, but it's still such a small fraction of people that you aren't going to be one, let alone someone like a Custodes. All of this, of course, is on top of the fact that every time someone blinks, Xenos or Chaos invade another world. Compare this to the other races. The Tau actually have pretty decent standards of living. Not always great, given that there's pretty prevalent propaganda, but it's still better than the Imperium. Mind control is the lesser evil compared to nuking your own planet. The Eldar live in a perfect post-scarcity society when they aren't fighting, so that's that. Yeah, there's
when they don't stop fucking with everything around them and basically forgetting the fact that the entire state of the universe is their goddamn fault.
Souls are forfeit upon death, but in day-to-day life, they're having a fine go with things. Orcs only care about fighting, and they're always fighting, so they're in heaven, same as in fantasy. Tyranids do not have the capacity to care about these things, so who cares? I don't think the Hive fleets have an existential crisis every time they devour a world. Dark Eldar are more or less the same as the Dark Elves. Their souls do drain away, but solving that issue is incredibly easy. Just stab the nearest slave in the throat and your agony quota is fulfilled. Have your soul back. There's peril and despair in Kamara, but there's equal amounts of debauchery and the fun kind of mayhem, so I'm still willing to place humanity below them on the quality of life scale. If you ask the common Necron what it thinks about its living situation, it's just going to look at you blankly because the average Necron warrior doesn't have the ability to think about that kind of thing. Their nobles might be sad about not having souls or working sexual organs anymore, but they're also immortal and incredibly powerful beings who can come back from death, so it could certainly be worse. Hell, depending on their interests, not being organic might be a good thing to them. Brazen, for example, has until the heat death of the universe to collect things because of it. Overall, yeah, life as humanity sucks in 40k. Life as humanity sucks in the Warhammer settings in general. Don't be a human in these settings if you had a choice. Also, I'm employing the all lore is canon, not everything is true defense, except my interpretation of the setting is definitely the correct one in this case, so you are certainly wrong and I am right because I have the YouTube channel, so I get to make the rules. I am not 5 years old, I am 6. Thank you, of course, to my channel members for generously donating their funds to support me. May your pancreases never falter in their sacred duty. Thank you all for watching and take care out there.
Alright, there's one last little bit in here.
Humanity in 40k also doesn't have access to Karl Franz, so quite frankly, they lose by default. No, I'm not going to stop making this joke. It isn't a joke. I want Karl Franz's dick.
Okay, so... Oh, God. Indoctrination, every race within the 40k lexicon, with the exception of the Eldar, with the exception of the Craft World Eldar, are heavily indoctrinated. And I mean... massively indoctrinated. The Necrons are literally automatons. The Drukhari are just brought up into this nightmare scenario where, you know, it doesn't matter what they do. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be fine. Don't worry. You're fine. Just, you feel like doing something, go do it. Just, as long as nobody shanks you, you're fine. Humanity, oh my God. Just the concept of being forced, you could threaten to kill me and tell me, hey, look, you know, we're going to put a bullet in we're going to send you to 40k. Go ahead and do the bullet, because I don't want to wind up in that situation. Because there's far worse things that can happen to you in 40k. There's far worse things that can happen to you in fantasy, but 40k, oh my God. Just no. Oh, so like if you're a Tau, of course, you know, you should just exterminate us yourself and just save everybody a problem. But they're so the indoctrination of the Tau is so unrelentingly complete. It's unnatural. The Imperium, on the other hand, you grow up indoctrinated. We do the same thing here. I mean, in you know in the modern world, we indoctrinate our children, we indoctrinate our society. It happens all over the place, but on the in 40K, it's on a whole ridiculous level that can't even begin to be comprehended. Um, from and the bad thing about it is, the sad thing about it is, no matter how bizarre it looks, we all know it could happen because we've seen it before. We've seen people do the kind of junk that is in 40K before. We've seen them do it throughout all of history. People have been indoctrinated to believe in the most ridiculous, just insane crap and have had horrific living standards for most of existence. So it's not like that's impossible for that to be the future, for that to be a future humanity begins to resemble. It's not at all impossible. I mean, corpse starch is a thing in the 41st millennium. And you don't really want, well, it's in the name. Duh, corpse starch. There you go. Have yourself a nice sandwich, Jimmy. But the thing about it is, the Imperium is a bureaucratic hellhole, a theocratic nightmare, and from the time you're born, you're fed a steady diet of bullshit. Ugh. God, I love 40K. In any case, that was PancreasNoWork's Humanity is the worst Warhammer race to live as, and bar none. If and that last there's several other worlds that he didn't mention, but at the same time, they're so few and far between it really doesn't matter. The if you were given an option though on what world you wanted to wind up living on, just pick a. If you just magically could pick a civilized world and just cut your losses, because at least one of three things: you're not on a Hive world, you're not on a Forge world, you're not on a Paradise world, and you don't run the risk of being on an Agri world where essentially they're herding around these massive things called groks, which are essentially murder rhinos on a heaping helping of steroids. In any case, all of PancreasNoWork's links going to be in the description down below, as well as my own, including my Patreon if you guys would like to support the channel, and a Discord for you guys to come in and throw rocks at me. This was a Patreon request, and like I said, yeah, some of you guys need to jump in there and make some more requests. In any case, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys, just whatever you do today, take it easy. Remember, good times rhymes with war crimes, so jump in a game, commit some war crimes, have a good time. Catch you guys next time. That actually all rhymed. What am I doing? No. Just, no. I gotta stop this.